If my buddy Ray Trevino is fainting himself, then it probably is a little warm of you. Oh, okay. Well, you know what they say, June showers bring May flowers. This is wonderful, all this rain we're getting today. Really, really nice. We are in Acts chapter 26. We do need to look at the last little bit of chapter 25. Looks like my title slide there is wrong. 25. We're actually in 26. My first mistake of the day. Maybe my second. But we are going to be seeing Paul give his most passionate defense for the gospel in the book of Acts. Acts chapter 26. He has a lot of folks that he's talking to. So we saw this at the end of last week. We saw at the end of chapter 25 that there are all these dignitaries that enter. It says in verse 23, on the next day, this day, Agrippa, his sister Bernice, came with great pomp, and they entered the audience hall with the military tribunes and the prominent men of the city of Caesarea. Then, at the command of Festus, Paul was brought in. Now, we watch enough TV and movies. We can see this scene in our heads, can't we? We can imagine what it would be like to hear the trumpet blaring, and maybe they've got some drums or something really exciting as Agrippa comes in with his lovely sister, and they sit down, and then you've got all these dignitaries, and I'm sure their wives as well. Just a lot of people here. Under normal circumstances, if Paul wasn't a prisoner, would he have been able to talk, to have, however long he took, 20, 30, 40 minutes, an hour, to talk to these folks? Would he have ever had that kind of opportunity? To talk to the governor of Caesarea, to high officials in the Caesarean government. He knows what an opportunity this is. And so Paul is brought in, the humble, brought down prisoner who comes in his chains, or at least under heavy guard. And he's given an opportunity to speak. I doubt he was that close as that picture portrays. But who knows? All right, so we've got all these folks in here. And you also were given Festus's inner thoughts, because he's telling Agrippa. Festus is the governor. He has the responsibility to send Paul to Caesar, and he needs to figure out exactly what Paul's heinous crime is. You remember that. That's a constant theme that runs through chapters 23 through 26. What did this guy do? What crime has he committed? So we're still in chapter 25, verse 24. Festus said, King Agrippa and all who are present with us, you see this man about whom the whole Jewish people petition me, both in Jerusalem and here, shouting that he ought not to live any longer. But I found, listen to this, I found that he had done nothing deserving death. He's telling everybody this before Paul's about to give his defense. I don't find this guy guilty of anything that deserves death. As he himself has appealed to Caesar, we talked about that a lot last week, appealed to the emperor, I decided to go ahead and send him. But I have nothing definitive to write to my Lord. He's talking about Nero. Therefore, I have brought him before you all, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that after we have examined him, I may have something to write. For it seems to me unreasonable in sending a prisoner not to indicate the charges against him. So really, the courtroom scene starts at the end of chapter 25. But we're now at chapter 26, and it says that Agrippa said to Paul, you have permission to speak for yourself. And that's where we will pick up. We're going to divide chapter 26 into 4 parts. You'll notice that the longest of these is verses 12 through 23. And you'll also notice that numbers 2 and 3 sound awful familiar. Paul recounting his former life as a persecutor of Christians. Been there, done that. We've already seen that. We saw it firsthand in chapter 9. We saw him rehash it in chapter 22. We see him reference it in his letters. Paul recounts the heavenly vision. Jesus appeared to him and said, why are you persecuting me? We're going to see it now for the third time. So Paul's Paul's former life as a persecutor, brought up 3 times. The heavenly vision, brought up 3 times in the book of Acts. What does that suggest to you? That is very important, yeah. And so Luke is repeating this information to really impress upon our minds, this is fundamental. This is really important stuff. Why is it so important? Because it's, in part, there are a bunch of reasons. One of the answers I would give is it shows God's providence getting Paul from Jerusalem to Rome on a free ticket as a prisoner. What other reasons do you see that Luke, the author of Acts, would emphasize this 3 times in his book?
I'm thinking one of those reasons would be to underline the fact that Paul was an apostle of Jesus Christ like the other apostles.
Okay.
And he had an intimate relationship with Christ himself. And not only that, I think it's to promote himself and his defense for what he's about to talk to Agrippa about.
Oh, okay. Yeah, absolutely. Some look at Acts and say, well, it's really ultimately about helping Paul give his defense. We are never told what actually happened when he stood before Nero. We understand that he was released. Looking at some of Paul's letters and the language there, it sounds like he was released. But this is probably exactly what he said to Caesar Nero, if and when given the opportunity. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
I think he's still trying to preach the gospel.
Exactly. He's trying to preach the gospel. And we're going to see that. That's excellent. That is excellent. So in Acts 26, you see the word defense. Let's go ahead and get some of these verses up here. He stretched out his hand and made his defense. Throughout these chapters 23 through 26 in particular, there's a lot of legal language. Appealing to Caesar, a legal term, appealing. His defense, this is a court of law. This is a tributary, not a tributary, this is a tribunal. That's the word I needed. And so I love this little description that we've seen a few times in Acts. Paul stretched out his hand and made his defense. He did that in some of the synagogues when given an opportunity to speak. Just a little, and I think it was a common characteristic. I don't think it was unique to Paul. But as we get into verses 2 and 3, this is just the introduction. He doesn't start actually getting into his lesson, his sermon, his defense in verse 4. But he says, I consider myself fortunate that it is before you, King Agrippa. Wait a minute, what about all those dignitaries? What about Bernice, his sister? What about, who is Paul primarily directing his message toward?
To the most important person there, Agrippa.
Why was he the most important? Because he was a king?
Because he had the power to either go further with Paul and help his defense, or to just squish him right there.
Okay, yeah. So let's keep looking and see. I think combining what both of you said, I think Paul's trying to convert the guy to Christ. He's actively trying to do that. Now that's up for opinion, but let's.
This is Paul's sermon to Agrippa.
Yeah, it is. It very much is, and it's exactly what I'm sure he would say to Caesar Nero, if and when that happened. I mean, we don't know anything historically about that event. All right, let's take a look. I am going to make my defense today against all the accusations of the Jews, chapter 24, especially because you are familiar with all the customs and controversies of the Jews. Therefore, I beg you to listen to me patiently. All right, we have in the English language a word you that can be either singular or plural. Other languages distinguish them. I guess we do have a plural, though, don't we? Is Paul saying here, it's fortunate that it is before y'all, King Agrippa the First? Is that what he's saying? He's not. It's singular. Does that mean he's ignoring everybody else? Well, of course not. But he is directing this at King Agrippa, and he gives us another indication as to why. You are familiar with all the customs and controversies of the Jews. How would Agrippa, King Agrippa, Herod Agrippa the second, how would he know anything about the Jewish people?
His own historical past with knowing Herod, his wife.
Yeah, so who is his great-grandfather? Herod the Great. His dad was Herod Agrippa the First. Have we ever seen him in the biblical account? We sure did. Acts chapter 12. What happened to Herod Agrippa the First in AD 44? God struck him, and he died eventually in a most heinous, horrible way. And Josephus, the Jewish historian Josephus, even mentions some of that. Now, we looked at that when we looked at it a year ago. Probably was. All right, so you know all the controversies. You know all the ways of the Jewish people. So you're going to understand exactly where I'm coming from when I'm trying to defend myself. I beg you to listen to me patiently. So now in verses 4 through 11, Paul starts talking about his life as a persecutor of Christians. And this is what he says. My manner of life from my youth, spent from the beginning among my own nation and in Jerusalem, is known by all the Jews. They have known for a long time, if they are willing to testify, that according to the strictest party of our religion, I have lived as a Pharisee. So Paul's really laying this detail on. And here's another really interesting observation about Paul's three conversion or the theophany of Jesus in Acts 9, Acts 22, Acts 26. They all have little different details. We're going to see a detail that this morning that Paul's going to give that is not in either of the others, which is very, very interesting to think about. And so he says, they have known. So you maybe heard me emphasize know and known. If they are willing to testify, are they willing to testify about my former life as a persecutor? No. In fact, who is right there right now to accuse Paul? Well, there's no witnesses. This is just supposed to be just a time for Paul to talk about why he's being charged so that Festus has some idea what to charge him with. We know you did something wrong. We aren't sure what you did. Does that sound like a good way to find the truth? Yeah, instead of innocent until proven guilty, you're guilty, and we need to find out exactly what you did.
Sometimes, even today's justice, they try to find ways to have the person self-incriminate.
Yeah.
And this might be a situation that they're just digging for possible.
I don't know. Well, I went ahead and clicked next on the slides, but known in verse 4, they have known in verse 5. We will see this verb again in verse 27, verses 26 and 27. For the king knows about all these things. I know something about you, Agrippa. I think it begins and ends by mentioning knowing. This is knowable. People already know about this. And I know something about you, Agrippa. I think this may be just a good beginning and ending mark. We sometimes call them inclusios or bookends. But there's also an emphasis on hope. And this has been building over the last few chapters. The hope of Israel. What is the hope of Israel? From a non-believer in Jesus, just a run-of-the-mill Jew, what is the hope of Israel? What does that mean to them in the first century world? What do you think? What do they want so desperately? Did you have a hand?
What the Jews want is the power to return to Jerusalem.
That's right. They want political power to be restored to Jerusalem. You read the Psalms especially. And what is it talking about? God's Zion, his holy hill, from which the world would center around Jerusalem, basically. Yes, sir?
And there's also prophecy all over the Old Testament about
Right.
a priest, a king, a savior. And so they're looking for that, but they missed it. They didn't find out, they didn't see Jesus as that savior.
So is Jesus that king and priest and savior?
Yes.
But according to the non-believer, we're still waiting. We're still waiting for the Messiah today. So he's saying, actually, the hope of Israel has already come. We have the hope of Israel realized. It's not that Paul and the apostles thought that the Old Testament was something new or something old and just needed to be gotten rid of. Their belief was the Old Testament does teach about a priest and a king and a prophet who is going to come, be sent by God. He is going to sit on David's throne. And what Paul is trying to argue is it's already happened. It has all been fulfilled in Jesus. So let's read these verses, and I especially want to think about that last sentence in verse 8. Hope, hope, hope. Here we go. And now I stand here on trial because of my hope in the promise made by God to our fathers, to which our 12 tribes hope to attain, as they earnestly worship night and day. And for this hope I'm accused by Jews, O king. Why is it thought incredible by any of you that God raises the dead? There's a lot there. The promise made by God to our fathers. What promises would that be? Abraham. The Abrahamic promises. The land of Canaan, the nation of Israel that would be made up by the 12 tribes. And ultimately, what's the promise that we all love so much? Through you, Abraham, through your seed, all nations of the earth will be blessed. How is that? How has that been fulfilled? Our answer would be Jesus. And that's what Paul is up against, trying to persuade people of what we readily accept and recognize and say, of course that's what the Old Testament is all about. What do you think about this sentence here? Why is it thought incredible by you people? What's wrong with you people? So here he is addressing all of them, that God raises the dead. What did Romans think about that? About resurrection from the dead? That's one of the reasons why they thought Jesus' crucifixion, which was shameful, was so ridiculous, because you're saying then this crucified Savior who is defeated, who died in the most painful, shameful, ignominious way imaginable, that then he was, what? What was that? Raised from the dead? That's ridiculous. That's foolishness. Yes, sir.
Well, you've got at least one Jewish expert in the crowd that would know full well that there were numerous examples of people being raised from the dead.
Are you talking about Agrippa?
Yeah.
Okay, well, do you think Agrippa believes all that? Are you talking about after Jesus is raised from the dead?
I'm
Or?
talking about you can't deny the witnesses that were available,
Right.
and have been living, breathing, talking to people.
Okay.
And
That's right.
It wasn't just Christ that had been raised from the dead.
Okay, all right, that is absolutely true. You got Lazarus, for example. That was a real ruckus for the religious leaders.
Agrippa would have been, familiar.
So let me ask you this. Why isn't Agrippa a Christian? Why isn't he a believer? If he knows about all this and knows the evidence is easily available. Paul wrote 1 Corinthians in AD 55, 56. We're now in AD 59. What Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15 is there are witnesses to Jesus' resurrection who are alive right now. Go talk to them. Some have died. Some have fallen asleep, he says. Go talk to them. But this is just some podunk Jewish rabbi going on and on about somebody who was dead and now he's supposedly alive. In fact, you see the connection one more connection between chapters 25 and 26 is Festus talking to Agrippa and saying, yeah, there's this crazy Jewish rabbi who keeps talking about a certain Jesus who was dead, whom Paul asserted to be alive. That's Acts 25, verse 19. We're now in chapter 26, and that's still at the heart of everything. The hope of Israel is inextricably tied to the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Our hope. If you take the resurrection away from our preaching and teaching, if you just cut it out of the Bible, if that's even possible, if you take it all out and it never happened, Christianity crumbles. Do you think that's accurate? What did Paul say in 1 Corinthians 15? There I go again. If we, of all people, have hoped in the resurrection, and there is no resurrection, then we are most to be pitied. But then he goes on the very next statement to say, but Jesus has been raised from the dead. And Dr. Paul goes through his dissertation in the remainder of 1 Corinthians 15 to talk about that. We're in Acts 26, though. So do you see what's really at the heart here? The resurrection, the hope of Israel. I myself was convinced that I ought to do many things in opposing the name of Jesus of Nazareth. And I did so in Jerusalem. I not only locked up many of the saints in prison after receiving authority from the chief priests, but when they were put to death, I cast my vote against them. Anybody have trouble with that? Paul the apostle giving his approval of killing Christians. Really? Does anybody have a problem with that? Because I sure do. Do you think Paul had a problem with that?
At the beginning, he didn't have a problem with it. He wanted to do it. But
Right.
when Christ presented himself, Paul was his own problem.
Okay, so he's getting to that when Christ appears to him.
God didn't have any problem with that. God allowed him to see Jesus and become an apostle, become a...
Yeah, I'm not sure I would say God didn't have a problem with Paul killing Christians.
Just like you might have a problem with it at this point in time now. But God never did because God saw and knew what the future held.
Okay. Paul's, a couple of statements that he made, and I know I brought these up before in this context. 1 Timothy 1, verse 15, I am the chief of sinners. I'm the worst sinner of all, is what he's basically saying. 1 Timothy 1:15, Ephesians 3, verse 8, to me, the very least of all saints, this grace was given to preach the unfathomable riches of Christ. You know, I'm not a psychologist, but I wonder if it always it got to Paul, that he had a hand. We speculate, did he travel from city to city and sometimes find out that he had killed a kid's parents? We're not told any of that.
That problem with Paul was also his strength in promoting
Okay.
Christ crucified.
Yeah.
That was what I was saying. He made this part of his defense to show once I discovered the truth, how much it changed me.
Okay.
And knowing the truth should change.
Once I found the truth, it changed everything. I turned it all around. And we've discussed the conversion of Paul, but still, it's just an amazing story. I punished them often in all the synagogues. That's where Jews are, right? They're assembled in the synagogues. They tried to make them blaspheme. And in raging fury against them, wow, I persecuted them even to 4 and 6. Now, he's used language like that before in Acts 22, but this is even stronger. And I'll remind you of what he wrote to the Galatians. I tried to destroy the church. I tried to destroy it. By the way, is Paul the only person in history who was trying to destroy Christianity? He's not. Has anyone succeeded? No, they have not. So Paul is telling the truth here. He's telling them about what I tried to do. But then something happened. So for us, this is a little bit of review, but I've got the text on the screen here, and I want to read it. In this connection, I journeyed to Damascus with the authority and commission of the chief priests. At midday, O king, so who's he talking to? At midday, O king, I saw on the way a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, that shone around me and those who journeyed with me. And when we had all fallen to the ground, I heard a voice saying to me in the Hebrew language, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is hard for you to kick against the pricks. Or the goads, excuse me. King James used to say pricks. That is new information. We have never been told this statement from Jesus. It is hard for you to kick against the goads. What in the world is that talking about? Paul kicking against pricks or goads?
Well,
Don't be shy. Tell me what that means.
the animals that pull the cart sometimes would kick, and they put little prods there to prevent them from continuing doing it.
Okay. So, what does that say about Paul's conscience? What is it? I don't know. I mean, what does it say about Paul that when he was persecuting Christians, he was kicking against the goads? What exactly does Jesus mean by that? Because remember, Paul has said twice, I've lived in all good conscience. So,
Maybe he's gradually getting the message
Yeah, that's
of
what.
salvation.
okay,
I think there was doubt in Paul's mind
okay.
about this time.
Perhaps so. Perhaps. And it is an intellectually honest person who is having to think this through. And I think that's maybe the message he's trying to present to Agrippa. What do you think? I'm wanting you to be honest about this. You know about my history. You know about the church. You know about all this. When are you going to make a change? I don't know. But that is interesting that it's there.
In a way, by Christ mentioning that to Paul about kicking against the goads, it was almost like saying, whether you like it or not, this is going to be happening one way or the other, and it's through you.
Okay.
that he's saying, this is going to happen through you.
So we can't help ourselves. Going back to Paul in Acts 9 and trying to figure out, based on this retelling, what was going on. But I really should be focusing on Agrippa. What is Paul trying to do by telling him this little story? Well, let me tell you about my life. All of this is to try to act. I guess I should ask this as a question. Do you think Paul is really trying? I mean, does he have in his head, I'm going to convert Agrippa today. I'm going to do it. I'm going to plant those seeds, and he's going to obey the gospel. I don't know, but I tend to think so. All right, verses 15 through 17. Who are you, Lord? Saul of Tarsus, Paul the apostle, we know him better as. He asked Jesus this. It's capitalized here, but this is, I don't know. I don't know what's in his head. Is he acknowledging that this is some supernatural being, powerful being? But Jesus tells him to get up, to follow some instructions. Drop down to the end, verse 17. I'm delivering you from your people and from the Gentiles to whom I am sending you. So he says to him, I'm sending you to the Gentiles. Did Paul interact with Gentiles at that point in his life? Was that still, a brewing issue? But he is a servant and witness to the things in which you have seen me. That's what you're to tell people. You weren't there for the resurrection, but you are a witness to the resurrection in that you are seeing the resurrected Lord. You are a servant. That's a very special prophetic type term. You are God's servant. You are a witness. That's the key word in the book of Acts, introduced in Acts 1 verse 8. And you will be my witnesses. You will testify about me. And why is he sending them to them? Verse 18 finishes by saying, to open their eyes so that they may turn from darkness to light and from the power of Satan, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me. Who is speaking those words to Agrippa? Paul. Who spoke these words to Paul? Jesus spoke these words to him. And I was not disobedient to the heavenly vision, he has said before. I did exactly what Jesus told me to do. To open their eyes. Have we seen language like that in the Bible? Talking about the Messiah in the future? Anybody have a footnote or a side column, center column reference that says, to open their eyes? Sounds a lot like Isaiah 55. We have not really emphasized this consistently. Isaiah is everywhere in the book of Acts. Sometimes it's quoted outright, Acts 8, 32 and 33. Sometimes, most of the time, it is alluded to. This is one of those. What about turning from darkness to light? Where's that from? Language like this. It's not necessarily a quotation, but it's reflective of Old Testament language. Isaiah 42. In Isaiah 49, there is a servant of God. You remember the servant songs? They're not really songs, but that's what they're called. Isaiah 42, 49. What's the most famous of the four songs? Isaiah 53, the suffering servant. In Isaiah 49, it talks about a servant who is blind, who should have been teaching the gospel to the nations, but had his own problems, including that he was blind to God's will for all the nations. And we're going to overcome that, and I'm going to send him. Isaiah 49, verse 6 is quoted in the Gospels and applied to Jesus. He's going to be a light to the Gentiles. And so it's not enough to be a light to the Jewish people. We're going to be a light to everybody. Who else in the New Testament became a light to the Gentiles and had literally been blind and spiritually blind? Isaiah 49 talks about a servant, and Paul is one of those servants. It's not taking anything away from Jesus our Lord, of course, but you are a servant. There we go. There's servant right there. And witness. Paul is the fulfillment of that Isaiah prophecy of someone who thought they were right and they were wrong. But then he turns it into a reference to Jesus. I'm trying to be like Jesus, to be a servant and a witness to the things that have happened. I'm trying to tell you about what really happened. I'm going to the Gentiles to open their eyes, to turn them from darkness to light. So those metaphors, that they go together, right? Your eyes are shut, you can't see, you open them, and then you can see. If it's dark in the room, you can't see, but when the light's turned on, you can see. And then he says, here it is, I was not disobedient to the heavenly vision. But he goes to Damascus, preaches the gospel, gets run out of town by the last second, and he starts preaching to Gentiles, and we know all about that in the book of Acts. And that's what he says got him in trouble with the Jews. For this reason, the Jews seized me in the temple and tried to kill me. And he says, I am not going to be deterred by that. I'm here to testify. That I'm here to give witness, literally. It's that same word witness we just saw. That the Christ must suffer, and that by being the first to rise from the dead, he would proclaim both light, both to our people and to the Gentiles. Light, light, light. Hope, hope, hope. That permeates this sermon. So I know we went through those a little quickly, but I want to get to this. Verses 24 through 31. As he was saying these things in his defense, Festus said with a loud voice, Paul, you are out of your mind. Your great learning is driving you out of your mind. Or as the King James Version that I grew up with when I was really young, much learning doth make thee mad. Right out of Shakespeare, right? How would you like it if somebody came up to you and said, Ray Trevino, you are crazy? Depends on the context, right? If it were you and me and we were at that, what's that deli you like so much? Right next to the wonderful Chipotle? Okay, Jersey Mike's. And you say, I want a pepperoni and pimento cheese sandwich. And I said to you, you are crazy. You got to get the roast beef. You know, that'd be okay. But when somebody says, you are beside yourself. This is ridiculous. This is preposterous. How did that make Paul feel? How does it make you feel that somebody would feel that way about your faith? We believe everything, every word that Paul has said. We believe it all. And what's one reaction that people make? You're nuts. And do you like how Paul handles it? Much learning doth make thee mad. But Paul said, I am not mad, most excellent Festus. I am not out of my mind. I'm speaking true and rational words. So at that moment, Paul is now looking at Festus. He's addressing him. And he's still addressing him when he says, he's looking at Festus and he says, for the king knows, I'm looking at you, Festus, and I'm talking to Agrippa. For the king knows about all these things, and to him I speak boldly. For I am persuaded that none of these things has escaped his notice, for they have not been done in a corner. Now that's that litotes thing we talked about, an exaggeration where you say, oh, that's great, when you really mean that's terrible. Not done in a corner. What is he saying here? Christianity has not been done in a corner. What does he mean? Everybody knows. Everybody knows about this. Everybody has an opinion on it. So he's talking to Festus for a brief moment, and he now turns his attention directly to Agrippa. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know that you believe. So you got this knowing business. And Agrippa said to Paul, in a short time would you persuade me to be a Christian? That was inflection expressing a question. Anybody have a translation where it's not presented as a question? Agrippa said, in a short time you would persuade me to be a Christian. But you have it as not a question?
No, I don't have it here, but I remember the old King James.
Yeah.
Almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian.
Oh, yeah, almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. Yeah, I'm going to use the King James Version for my sermon this morning. How about that? No, I got a story about that. But I love the King James Version. It is austere. It is magnificent. The only problem I have with it is it's 400 years old. And that just creates a barrier. The King James Version is what shaped Western civilization as we know it. Of course, now people are trying to unshape it. Whether short or long, I would to God that not only you, but also all who hear me this day might become such as I am, except for these chains. That tells us a little something about Paul, except for these chains. Did he like being a prisoner? No. But he understood this is how God has designed it for him to get to Rome. We've already talked about that. And he wouldn't wish that on anyone else, of course. In a short time, would you persuade me to be a Christian? Or, Paul, you almost persuade me to be a Christian. What's going on here at this moment? Can we imagine the drama? Can we hear the voice inflections? What do you think is going on here between Paul and Agrippa? Between the whole situation? Have you ever been at a dinner party? You got lots of people talking at a table, and then somebody says something nuts. Somebody says something insulting or just so crass. And how do everybody at the table respond? They get real quiet. King Agrippa, you believe the prophets. I know that you believe. Well, Paul, in a short time, you make me a Christian. That's my interpretation. He is diffusing a tense situation. I don't think he's saying, well, Paul, you're going to make me a Christian soon. Ha ha ha, or something like that. I think he is diffusing the situation. After all, he is a politician. He knows how to do that. What do you think? What do you think he's doing?
I agree.
Yeah, he agrees with me.
Didn't he appoint the high priest? Did that occur?
Oh, you asked me that, and so I want to say yes. I think you may be right.
I mean, the Sadducees fully reject resurrection.
Yeah.
And that's
Okay, speak up because I can't hear you.
they're pretty prominent at that time. Sadducees.
They are.
Don't want to make them angry.
That is true. Interesting you say that. The people that Herod sided with the most, I mean, yeah, he had to deal with the Sadducees because of the politics. They were the ruling class. But Josephus, interestingly, always associates Herod in relatively positive terms. And Josephus himself was a Pharisee. And so the question becomes, and I haven't read Josephus thoroughly enough to have my own strong opinion, but you definitely had politicians who were threading the line. And I don't know what exactly he's saying here, but that is really interesting to think about, that Agrippa had close connections with the leaders. He's got to be careful what he says. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah.
Okay. Somebody else had a hand? Okay.
I was just gonna say, if vacuum cleaner salesman comes to your house, you've already decided what you're gonna buy. He's just gonna show up and you say, well, at some point, I'm gonna tell him, no, I'm not gonna do it. And Agrippa was put on the spot, and this was
Yeah,
his way
he's put
of
on the spot.
defusing the situation. Say, hey, you almost got me, but that's all. He's not going any further.
So what was Paul's objective? He wants to preach the gospel. He wanted, I'm telling you, I believe he wanted Agrippa to say, you know what? This is all true. As far as we know, that never happened. So it's over. The defense is over. It ended on a bang, didn't it? Then the king rose, the governor, and Bernice, so Festus, Bernice, those who were sitting with him. And then they start having this conversation, and this is where we're going to end the last two verses. This man is doing nothing deserving death or imprisonment. That's what people are saying. And Agrippa said to Festus, this man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar. We've got 2 classes left. We've got 2 chapters left. Acts 27, we are going to go on the voyage of a lifetime. This is not a Carnival cruise. This is just an amazing account in Acts 27. I would encourage you to get the material that I have, 4 pages, and read Acts 27, we're going to discuss what's going on here in this marvelous chapter. Thank you for your participation this morning. I really appreciate it.